My mother she would give us a hard time sometimes, and she would say to us, I don't know what's wrong with you young people. You think you just fell out of a coconut tree? You exist in the context of all in which you live and what came before you.
I'm Norman Solomon, and this is The Blue Road to Trump Hell. I'm speaking with India Walton, the senior strategist for Roots Action. She's a longtime community activist who emerged in 2021 as a powerful progressive presence in the progressive movement after a stunning Democratic primary victory over a 16-year incumbent mayor of Buffalo. Welcome, India.
Hi, Norman. Thanks for having me.
Sure. Well, one question came to mind. I thought I'd start this way. Seems like we can't live with the Democratic Party and we can't live without it.
I don't know that we can't live without it, though. I think that we've not found a viable alternative, but I think more and more it's becoming clear that there's a real void in leadership in the Democratic Party. And I think that, an alternative is worth exploring and investing in. And that's a lot of the conversation that I hear in progressive circles is that people just need something else outside of the duopoly.
And that void, I mean, what are the chances you think it could be filled by, well, Zoran Mamdani and others who are really rising to the top in terms of putting up a fight in these Democratic primaries?
Yeah, I think that it is encouraging and it is fun to watch the rise of folks like Zohran in New York and Omar Fatah in Minneapolis. And the interesting thing is that the response from Democrats in these campaigns with these really charismatic candidates who have great messaging, and in the case of Zoran, who's amassed a volunteer base of more than 80,000 people.
I will freeze the rent. I won't defund the police. I will make buses fast and free. I won't decriminalize misdemeanors. I will deliver universal child care. I won't require everyone to eat halal food.
To have Democrats not embrace that is just fascinating to watch. And it's also concerning about the future of what democracy means for this country.
Well, speaking of talking a good game and not walking the walk, we have a lot of talk from Democratic Party leaders about how they really care about poor people, low income people, single mothers, and so forth. But they totally disconnect that from their own service to Wall Street, to big money. It's like, oh, there's all these low income people who are suffering deprivation. And well, there's wealthy people, but as Joe Biden says, our problems don't come from billionaires.
I think that our problems do come from billionaires. And the more I think about it and the more I listen to the rhetoric during the shutdown and the threat of people losing SNAP benefits and Medicaid and Medicare, the more I think about how the wealthiest people in this nation are responsible for the need for social safety nets, right? I mean, the largest employers, when we think about the Amazons and the Walmarts, these are not jobs that pay a thriving wage where people are not dependent upon SNAP and child care assistance and all of the other things that allow them to be employed by these people who are able to purchase entire cities to host their weddings. So I think that there is just a misplaced anger with poor and working people. And I think that the folks who are really responsible for the economic downturn are those at the top. That
Yeah,
includes the politicians.
the uh, the effort to just disconnect the poverty from the obscene wealth is just constant. It's as though there's no causality between the two, and class politics are just so blurry in this country. And on the right wing, it's okay. They just scramble the deck. The Republicans don't really deal with it. It's all just rhetoric. Democrats talk about people who are on the short end of the economic stick, but they don't talk really about challenging those who are ripping everybody else off.
They don't. And the right has done such a masterful job of convincing people that their opposition, their enemy, is immigrants and refugees. And somehow, it's people who are not of this land who are taking things that are rightfully theirs. And when we say, well, healthcare should be a human right, and you hear in response to that, well, healthcare should be a right for United States citizens only, and like it's just really misguided and misplaced, where we have the top 1% who are over consuming most of the resources in this country.
George Orwell said, "Those who control the past control the future. Those who control the future control the present," or something like that. And the reality is that we are encouraged to forget about the past and not draw really conclusions from it. I think that some people listening might feel, well, we have this horrific situation with Donald Trump and his power over the executive branch, the legislative branch, much of the Supreme Court, and so forth. Why are we talking about Democrats? And I want to ask you about that, because it seems that unless we do deal with how we got here, we won't get out of here.
That's right on. And the Democrats got us here. Um, and, you and I were on the ground level of the campaign to have an open Democratic primary before we got to the point where Kamala Harris had 107 days to make a convincing argument, which she and the Democrats failed to do. And, there were so many folks who predicted that we would be here. And we saw Project 2025, and we heard Donald Trump's plan, and the alarm wasn't sounded loud enough. There was not an effort to speak to working class voters, and there was not a response to the cause for the end of the genocide in Gaza. So, I mean, even the post-mortem, right? The Democrats went and blamed progressives for their loss instead of taking any accountability for their failure to lead on the issues of the day, which is mostly economics. And there was just not a resonant message. And here we are.
Here we are. And you and I worked really hard, along with other colleagues at Roots Action, on behalf of the Don't Run Joe campaign after he formally filed for reelection. It was changed by name to Step Aside Joe, but we kept saying, this guy is a loser. He's a loser in terms of mobilizing the base. His politics are not progressive, and he can't present a coherent argument to defeat Trump. And we were blown off by the Democratic Party establishment. How do you look back at that experience of trying to prevent this catastrophe that is now upon us?
I'm starting to get tired of saying we tried to tell you or we told you so. We were one of the first groups to call out his cognitive decline. It was so obvious and you could see it. And some of the responses we got were saying, well, if you don't want Joe Biden, then you must want Trump. No, we don't want Joe Biden, and there has to be a better option. We want a true democratic process, a small d democratic process where the voters actually choose who the nominee is. And we are rejecting the ineptitude and the failed leadership of the Biden administration. And we did not see the Democrats rise to the occasion and respond to the calls from inside the House.
Essentially, members of Congress who were Democrats, the so-called leadership of the party, they were saying to us and to the general public, who are you going to believe, your eyes and ears or us? And they kept telling us we should just put trust in what they were trying to say, even though privately they were saying that they were concerned, to put it mildly, about Biden's capacity to run for reelection. This podcast is called The Blue Road to Trump Hell. And it's also the name of my book that's just been published that is free online. People can just go to blueroad.info to read the book themselves. And a reason that I wanted to put the book out for free is that I thought how we got here is essential if we're going to proceed to get rid of these Trump fascists at this point. And I don't use that term lightly. We've experienced now with almost a year of Trumpism in power that the escalation is there and the goalposts keep being moved. And we're encouraged to believe, oh, this is not a dictatorship. This is not autocracy.
And they say, we don't need him, freedom, freedom. He's a dictator, he's a dictator. A lot of people are saying maybe we like a dictator. I don't like a dictator. I'm not a dictator. I'm a man with great common sense and I'm a smart person.
And yet, what 1 month we would have thought and we were told, oh, that can't happen and it would be so outrageous, then we get used to it.
Yeah, the times are scary, and I want us to be more brave than we are fearful, but there is no rule of law. There, the Trump administration, they're doing whatever they want, whenever they want, and it's starting to get more and more difficult to think of strategies to maintain a defense against what is currently happening.
And people are organizing is the good part. Could you talk a little bit about what you've been doing in Buffalo? I mentioned at the start that you were able to be the leader, be the candidate of a grassroots movement that astonished people by defeating an entrenched incumbent, I would say a rather, perhaps not legally, but morally corrupt incumbent mayor. He'd been in for 16 years. He was assumed to be a shoo-in to win the Democratic primary, and you were the candidate who defeated him. How did that happen, and how do you connect that to the campaigns in 2025 that are very progressive and look like they may well win?
You know, that happened on the ground. It happened on the ground. It happened with a true grassroots movement. And it was an organizing project. I think that, and I believe Bernie Sanders said it, the way to win against organized money is with organized people. And we're seeing droves of volunteers come out in New York City for Zoran and knock on doors and host phone banks. And it was a very similar thing here in Buffalo. We knew that we were up against 30 years of name recognition and power. And the way that we introduced ourselves and our ideas to people was on doors and on the phones and by having conversations. And I think that a return to that ultimately is what's going to help us win against the current regime, because people need to have real life conversations about what is happening and who stands to lose the most out of the policies that are being implemented right now. And that's ultimately, at the end of the day, going to be the working class that suffers.
We've been talking about the Democratic Party establishment, which is certainly a humongous barrier to genuine progressive change, and it has failed to effectively push back against the right wing. There's also the media, and let's talk a bit about the example of Buffalo. If it had been up to the daily newspaper in that city, the Buffalo News, very few people would have voted for you, right?
The media in Buffalo was awful during the election. I mean, the number of stories that were printed with baseless allegations and anonymous sources, you almost would question the journalistic integrity of the Buffalo News, which is the singular newspaper of record in Buffalo, New York. But aside from that, there were also efforts to stifle our message and our progress. You know, when mayoral debates typically happen. They are sponsored by local media outlets, and no one called for a debate until after I won the primary, at which time everyone wanted to debate when my opponent at that point was no longer on the ballot. So I do think that media has a role to play. And one of the things that I'm most proud of about Roots Action and the work that we do with Progressive Hub is that there's this independence in our communication and our media strategy, so that we know that there's a place that people can go to find the truth in a way that's not pushing the narrative of the ultra wealthy who own all of the mainstream media outlets.
Yeah, and that you're reminding me, that's why we at Roots Action set up the daily media source, progressivehub.net, where people can not only get very latest breaking news and information and analysis, but literally on the same page, an action item, what they can do, because a lot of our media training is, and acculturation is, hey, you just are a spectator. You find out what's happening and you move on. But progressivehub.net is a place where, yeah, you learn, but also you right in front of you is a way you can quickly take some kind of action. I think what you're talking about in terms of what happened in Buffalo is so important now, because more than ever, literally, the media is moving to the right. We have this horrific example of how CBS News has been taken over by an extreme Zionist who is very hostile to basic Palestinian rights. And we also have a consolidation of overall network control by very, very wealthy people who are running corporations that don't care about journalism. They care about profits. And a couple quick examples, both the owners of the LA Times and the Washington Post prevented their editorial boards that wanted to endorse against Trump for Kamala Harris. Those owners said, no, you can't do it. And this is sort of the paradigm that we're looking at. And one more point, Jeff Bezos, the owner of Amazon and Whole Foods and the Washington Post, sent a tweet out right after Trump was elected last November, pledging to work with him, as Mark Zuckerberg did. So this is what we're dealing with media. And I think if we can extrapolate what you experienced from the mass media in Buffalo to our national situation, yes, it's discouraging, but it also shows not only can you beat City Hall, you can beat corporate media.
That's right. And the other thing that I would just, caution folks about is the use of this sort of state-sponsored media where they're putting up these messages at the airports and the TSA, right, with saying it's the Democrats' fault that your flight is delayed because the government is shut down. And I just want people to just be aware of the messages that we are receiving and to know that it's okay to reject it, and that just because it's on a television screen, it doesn't necessarily make it true. And to use the tools and the skills that we have been sharing in our media trainings and other places to be able to decipher what is fact from what is fiction.
The class identification of the people who are in leadership, it seems like really identifying with low-income people who we know are very disproportionately people of color. The identification just doesn't seem to be there from people running the party.
It's not, and it's unfortunate. And I believe that is the reason why we need campaign finance reform so badly, because there's the ideas that come from people who live actual working class lives that are so valuable and would be great to be implemented. And then the ability to win an election is something completely different, right? And if we want true working class voices in democratic leadership, we just have to get the big money out of politics so that everyday people stand a chance.
I've been speaking with India Walton, the senior strategist with Roots Action. I'm Norman Solomon, and this is The Blue Road to Trump Hell. Executive produced by Harrison Melkin. Music by R.J. Eskow. My new book is The Blue Road to Trump Hell: How Corporate Democrats Paved the Way for Autocracy. You can download it for free at blueroad.com. info.